Welcome in, guys. This is Warren Sharp of SharpFootballAnalysis.com and SharpFootballStats.com. This is a special Thanksgiving edition of the Sharp Football Analysis podcast. I'm actually recording this on YouTube. It's going to be thrown up onto the YouTube channel, and I'm also going to rip the audio out of this and throw it up onto the Sharp Football Analysis podcast. So a couple different ways to consume this episode. I figure since we didn't do the Monday night show, which is the pregame show that we typically record at 8 p.m. Eastern, breaking down what just happened from the prior week's action, and with an eye to the next week, which is obviously week 12 this week. We didn't do that show on Monday night. We're not doing the show Friday night, recording that podcast. We're basically combining a couple of those things into this podcast. Might as well do a video pod, and I did a bunch of these last season and the year before that. I think they're pretty useful, walk you through a few different things, but we're going to be doing this in such a manner that it's going to be easy for you to follow while you're listening on iTunes or another podcasting software. So it'll be audio focused, but we'll do have some video content that'll be up there on the YouTube channel if you choose to digest it in that manner. We're going to go ahead and break down a few things, very high level things that we saw this past week, some things that were puzzling, coaching decisions, personnel moves, things of that nature from last week. And then we're going to turn ahead and look to some things in the future. And I think one of the good things that we're going to do this week, in addition to discussing a couple of the matchups, is we're going to also dive into some of the futures, some of the future market in terms of playoff performance, trending performance, because these teams, as you guys know, very different than what they were week 1, week 2, week 3. Yet if you look at full season stats and full season data, you're liable to be led astray because there's been teams have had injuries, in some cases massive injuries that completely changed their outlook. So looking back at full season statistics, while those can be helpful at times, are definitely going to be a little bit distracting. So I'm built a few different tools that are going to help us be able to isolate how teams are doing of late, how they are trending. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys. So with that said, let's get on with the show and start breaking some things down. We're going to talk a little bit about things that matter in the postseason, things that define success. And one of the things that we're going to discuss is quarterback play. And I pulled up the statistics up here on the offense passer rating table by quarterback here, and I filtered for week 11. And if you're looking at the screen, you could see the quarterbacks who threw at least 10 passing attempts last season and how they did. And one of the things that stands out to me, obviously, is you look at the passer rating, which is what this is sorted by, and the quarterbacks that all rank at the bottom of this list all threw multiple interceptions. And interceptions obviously kill your passer rating. They also kill your ability to win games. And I want to focus in on the guy at the bottom of the list, is Nathan Peterman. I thought this decision was horrendous by the ownership, and because I assume the ownership is in some way factoring in here to what the head coach is doing. But this was just a terrible decision, in my view, to go ahead and start Nathan Peterman in this spot against the LA Chargers. And there are a number of reasons why. The first reason, if we toggle back over here to the strength of schedule for the Bills, is the simple fact that based on opposing passing efficiency defenses, you can see that the Bills just faced the two most difficult opponents that they faced the entire year. The New Orleans Saints, obviously, they got trucked at home. They lost the game 47-10. If they wanted to get Peterman involved, they very, very easily could have decided to wait until this game this week against Kansas City, who sports the 20th ranked pass defense. They struggle in a lot of different areas of defense. The run game probably would have had some more success. And then you look at the rest of the schedule. They could have seen how Peterman was going to fare against some of these other teams, such as the New England Patriots, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Miami Dolphins. Those are the only three teams over the last 5 weeks that they'll play. They play the Patriots and the Dolphins twice each. So it made no sense to me to throw this kid out there week 11 in LA against the Chargers, a very strong team with a very strong pass rush, one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. And we can see that if we go here and look at the pass pro efficiency, pass pro meaning pass protection, you can see that they rank 7th the 7th best pass rush. None of the other teams that they face are going to rank anything better than 22nd in the league. Yet he threw him out there against a very strong pass rush, a very strong overall pass defense. It made zero sense to me. In some ways, I think that this move was made to set this kid up to fail. Maybe there was something that they saw that they didn't like. I know that sounds ludicrous because why would you sabotage a young kid? But that's effectively the end result. They just announced that they are now going back to Tyrod Taylor this week. You destroyed this kid's confidence by putting him out there, having the one lone experience of this season for him. We'll see what happens at the end of the year. But thus far, potentially, the lone experience, this 5 interception performance in this spot. And I really think that that was a factor of so many other things going on around them. I really don't think that that was necessarily a factor of this kid is a terrible quarterback, but that's what everybody's going to think and remember about him is 5 interceptions in the first half, and he posts a 17.9 passer rating, which is worse than throwing the ball into the ground every single pass attempt, obviously. So that is a massive issue, and I just felt like that entire situation was handled in the most idiotic manner by the Buffalo Bills, by their coaching and personnel and ownership, whoever was involved in that decision. Clearly, I don't think they're looking at the schedule. They're not looking at, obviously, they're not looking at Sharp Football Stats. They're not looking at how easy it would have been for Peterman if they just inserted him this week or next week and the rest of the season to see what he can really do. Now you're left with a team that knows they don't want Tyrod Taylor in there, but is forced to start him. They don't believe Tyrod's the future. They're just in a very awkward situation. Now basically you're letting Tyrod Taylor try out for other teams in the league. I personally have no issue with throwing Peterman in there. I realize the team had a good win-loss standings. They were in the playoff hunt. They still technically are, but nobody really thinks this team's going anywhere. I mean, in reality of it, like they get rid of Marcel Darius. We're going to talk about him momentarily. That completely changed the outlook of this season's trajectory. Yes, you brought on a trade. He is now injured at wide receiver. You brought on Calvin Benjamin. I just don't know what we're going to get out of this team moving forward, and I'm not really sure if I don't think they're going to have a very good final end of the season result. But Tyrod Taylor does give them a better chance to win now, but they're still not going to do anything in the postseason, and any wins that they sustain now are going to hurt their overall ability to build a better team for next year. So I guess maybe you're appeasing Buffalo Bills fans or trying to admit to the public that you were wrong by starting Tyrod Taylor this week. And I realize for the veterans, he does give you a better chance to win. And so while you're technically still alive for the postseason, maybe you owe it to those guys. I understand that for the locker room chemistry and that sort of thing. But you've already screwed that up by putting Peterman out there. And my point is, I want to see Peterman this year, and I would have rather seen him start either this week or the following weeks, as opposed to that spot out in LA. And I think the Bills would have lost that game in LA regardless, but starting Peterman just sealed that deal. And now the Bills are sitting here. They've got a 5-5 record. They're playing Kansas City this week. It was a 10-point underdog. We'll see what happens when they repost this number. That'll be interesting to see. All right, speaking of which, let's go ahead and turn the focus now to the Buffalo Bills. And we're going to look at what they've done since Marcel Darius left. If you take a look at this page here, situational success rates and ranks, the Buffalo Bills, and you can find this on the efficiency success tab right here, situational success rates and ranks. The Buffalo Bills, actually we're looking at the defensive one, but at any rate, the Bills, without Darius, the last 3 weeks, they've really, really struggled. In those 3 games since he left, they have allowed 638 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. Absolutely ridiculous numbers defensively for the Buffalo Bills. If you look at what they were allowing before he left, though, in terms of success rate, the Buffalo Bills were sitting right here at the 5th best team in the league, only 39% of runs against them were graded out as successful, which was 5% better than the league average. And if you instead, and then you can also look at what the Jacksonville Jaguars were allowing. The Jacksonville Jaguars were the NFL's worst team at allowing 56% of runs against them without Darius in there to be graded out as successful. That was the worst rate in the league. But if we go ahead and we take a look at what the Buffalo Bills have been the last 3 weeks, from weeks 9 onward, 9, 10, 11, what we will find is that the Buffalo Bills have now allowed 52% of runs against them to grade as successful, which is the 5th worst in the league over the last 3 weeks. Where did the Jacksonville Jaguars rate? They dropped their number that they were allowing in terms of over 50%, all the way down to 38% successful, like the Buffalo Bills before them, much better than the league average, this time about 6% better than the league average, whereas the Bills were 5% better. That has made a massive, massive difference when you look at what the Buffalo Bills are doing defensively. And if you look at some of the rushing offenses that the Buffalo Bills are going to face the rest of the season, it gives you even more reason to realize like what some of the issues were with Buffalo. They played a great run team in the New Orleans Saints week 10. So obviously the New Orleans Saints is going to be able to produce some points against you, but the Jets and the Chargers ranked 26th and 28th on the league in terms of rushing offense. This week they faced the Kansas City Chiefs, who rank 5th best. And the following, they've got 2 games against the Patriots to go the rest of the season, who rank 9th best. This Buffalo Bills run defense has really got to step up. You could try to blame Tyrod Taylor as much as you want to, or whatever quarterback you're going to throw in there. But when you're faced with massive deficits in game because you can't stop the run, that's going to play into everything that you have to do offensively, which is pass the ball more. That allows the defense and their pass rush to tee up against you. It just makes for a problematic situation. Now, I do think, given the schedule, as we discussed, that the Bills should fare a little bit better offensively against these pass defenses that aren't very good. But it remains to be seen, and this game is very interesting to me, what Kansas City's rushing offense is going to do, because Kansas City has been completely unproductive rushing the football with Kareem Hunt. And Andy Reid, obviously his strength is the first half of games. It's games off of a bye where he's had extra time to prepare. He's very good scheming things up early. He's not been a very good in-game adjustment type coach. And it was really disappointing to see their performance in New York against the Giants last week. They obviously lost that game in overtime, but their ability to run the ball, to do anything useful in that game was pretty surprising. Their run game just is not productive enough. But in this particular game, their run game wasn't terrible. If we scroll down and look at what they were able to do running the football in this game, it really wasn't very bad. The issue was that for whatever reason, they passed the ball. They passed the ball 59% of the time, even though there was wins in this game in New York. And it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me what they were doing from that perspective when they were running the ball, I believe, for yards per carry, a 52% success rate when they did run the football against the Giants. Those numbers aren't bad, but they passed the ball 59% of the time. And I'm pulling these off of the Sharp box score, which you can find in the toolbar menu. It really just did not make a whole lot of sense for their game planning and for their strategy. So especially when Alex Smith, 43% of his passes were successful. He threw 3 interceptions. It was a little bit windy. It's not as if they had one big run and so their average was increased and their success rate was bad. No, their success rate was good, and yet they were running the ball far too little than what they should have been doing. So it remains to be seen. Kansas City at home against the Buffalo Bills run defense. If they can't get their run game back on track this week, it's really over for them. I just don't understand what this team is doing offensively. They previously had been a strong run team that could pass off of that. they can't get the run game going, or they're not relying on it enough. It's either one or the other. In some games, it's both, but in some situations, as we can see in this game, they're running the ball okay, but they're going too pass heavy. In other situations, their run game just is not very effective. Against this Bills defense, expect their run game to get back on track. That should open things up for them in their passing game as well. All right, next up, let's discuss two games that had very similar final scores, very similar game scripts and flows. Just really interesting the parallels here, but in one case, it had to do extremely with injuries. In the other case, it was just ridiculous the way that things unfolded. And the two teams that I felt were similar were the Oakland Raiders and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, both these teams lost by an overwhelming fashion. The Raiders lost 33-8, whereas the Dallas Cowboys lost 37-9. Neither game was particularly close, obviously, even from the start. But if you notice, as I'm toggling back and forth between the two games on the Sharp box score, one thing should stand out to you, and that's the visualized success, and that's why I drew it up the way that I did. You can see clearly how the Oakland Raiders offense, in terms of their overall success rate at 55%, much better than the Dallas Cowboys success rate at 37% is what the Dallas Cowboys had. But for whatever reason, the Oakland Raiders weren't scoring points. They were 55% successful play rate. They were averaging on the ground 5.2 yards per carry and a 76% rushing success rate. Yet they only scored 8 points in the entire game. So digging into this a little bit more, obviously we can understand that they turned the ball over essentially inside the Patriots, as they're going in for touchdowns potentially, inside the Patriots 21-yard line 2 different times. One was a fumble where they fumbled on the 7-yard line of the New England Patriots. It was actually closer to the end, and that was the last line of scrimmage. Another one, they got down to the Patriots 21-yard line and turned it over on downs. There's 2 possessions that you walk away with no points. The issue that I have, though, obviously that's ball security, that's decision making. Those are some things that they clearly have a problem with. But the issue that I have is when they're down on the New England Patriots 46 and they punt the ball, and the New England Patriots 47 and they punt the ball. You're playing at altitude at extremely high elevation in Mexico City. You're playing against Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, who clearly are having no problems pushing the ball down the field. Until the very end of the game, where they stopped caring, with about 20 seconds left, they punted the ball. They had only 1 punt in their first 8 drives. Every single other drive they scored points on. Now, they struggled at times in terms of being productive, but they were being pretty successful overall offensively. The issue becomes, what were the Raiders actually doing here? And they turned the ball over a ridiculous 7 times in this game. Absolutely absurd number of turnovers here. And look, the difference between the Raiders and the Cowboys is fairly clear. In this game, the Dallas Cowboys were without 2 of their key offensive weapons. Left tackle Tyron Smith, running back Ezekiel Elliott. We've discussed this before, how Ezekiel Elliott is worth more than the 1 point that the sports books and, we're making adjustments to them, because it's a fundamental change in the way that this team is playing offense. You see the rushing success rate was down at 44%, and that impacts their ability to throw the ball effectively. And Dak Prescott has just been terrible. Dak Prescott, without that strong run game to lean on, 12 sacks, 3 interceptions, 0 touchdown passes, 321 yards passing in total, and 16 total points without Ezekiel Elliott there the last 2 weeks. This offense has been crippled. Of course, Tyron Smith doesn't help matters at all. Now, I'm assuming for the Thanksgiving Day game that Tyron Smith is going to be back. He was working out before the game last week in anticipation. You could see it on the field in pregame warmups. He didn't look terrible. He was working in anticipation of playing this Thursday game on Thanksgiving. And, Dallas, their season is on the line. It's on the brink. This is a game that they absolutely sort of need to get at home on a short week. they play the Washington Redskins a week from Thursday, so they get a full week to prepare for the Redskins after that, and then they have a few extra days. They get their mini bye week the following week. But if they drop to 5-6 on the year, I mean, they're obviously not catching the Philadelphia Eagles, so they have to be trying to battle for another wild card spot, and it's going to be very difficult if they drop this game. So for their purposes, I'm assuming Tyron Smith plays. They're going to need him because the LA Chargers, we discussed them earlier in the podcast, ridiculously strong pass rush, tremendous pass rush, can get after them. And they've been playing much better run defense since they got Peterman back in the lineup, the middle linebacker who they lost in the preseason. There was a game earlier in the preseason, I believe it was like week 3 of the preseason, week 2 or 3, where they lost Peterman for the season. And that was a big blow to the overall run defense. He was the signal caller of that unit. And he's just come back to the team in the last couple of weeks, and their run defense has been significantly better as a result. So this is a team that I think poses some threats with the pass rush and the run game. It's going to be on Dak, and if they don't have Tyron Smith there, look out, because the defense of the Chargers should be able to do just as much as the Eagles did, if not more, thanks to their pass rush. And what has Jason Garrett learned? You know, it's 2 weeks now. Things have not gone well for the Cowboys. What has he learned that he can apply to this game against the Chargers that's going to help this offense be more productive? Obviously, Tyron Smith returning would be massive, but what else? What else are you going to do, Jason Garrett, that's going to put your team in a position to win this game? Next up, let's discuss the Chicago Bears. I talked before about different issues that are going to win teams games in the playoffs and things that you need to have rolling at this time of year. This is all foreshadowing something that I'm going to be discussing later in the pod, but the first topic we kind of discussed is quarterback play, the ability to avoid interceptions, and we looked at what was happening with the Buffalo Bills, Nathan Peterman, when they went out to LA to take on the Chargers. Let's go ahead and look at the Chicago Bears. Now, obviously, the Bears aren't playoff headed to the postseason, but the next issue that you have to be aware of is the kicking game. The kicking game is extremely vital to success in the NFL, and the unfortunate part is, in today's era, most of these kickers can absolutely not be trusted. There's a small handful of guys that you can trust to kick the ball to win you a game. For the most part, if I am a head coach, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago on the podcast, it was when Jacksonville had gotten all the way down on that interception return of Phillip Rivers, and all they needed to do was punch the ball in to try to score a touchdown there to end the game. I think they had the ball on the 1-yard line, but they got a 15-yard taunting call, and so they settled for a field goal that was actually tipped, almost blocked, but barely went through, and they won the game 20-17 in overtime. I said at that point in time, you cannot trust your kickers, and that's why if they hadn't got that taunting call, I would have strongly advocated to trying to punch the ball into the end zone there from the 1-yard line and settling for a field goal as a last resort. You look at this game, it perfectly defines why you can't trust your kicker. The Chicago Bears played a great game. If you look at their overall yardage, 6.5 yards per play versus 6.1, a 54% success rate edge over the Detroit Lions compared to 48% success rate. They had 25 first downs compared to 19. And if you look at what they were able to do rushing the football, tremendous. I mean, this is what I was guessing, but this vastly exceeded my expectations from this perspective. The Chicago Bears were able to run the football 30 times for 222 yards. That's 7.4 yards per rushing attempt, and more importantly, a 60% success rate on the ground. The Lions know that the Bears are going to try to run the football, yet they still could not stop the run game of the Chicago Bears. I love this run game. I love the heart that Chicago plays with when they're attempting to run the football. But here's the key sequence. You obviously, the big edge for the Lions was that return touchdown. The Bears were up big, and they gave up they fumbled the ball. The Lions picked it up, and ran it into the end zone. That was a massive momentum shift in the game, and the Lions then got back on track after that and actually took the lead. But in a back and forth game at the very end, the Lions go down and kick a field goal, a 51-yard field goal in those conditions, and Matt Prater nails it, a tremendous kicker. The Chicago Bears get the ball back, a minute 32 left, remarkably drive all the way down to the 28-yard line, yet miss a field goal that should have sent this game into overtime. So they got 6 yards closer, but their kicker kicking at home could not nail it. Very disappointing from that perspective to be able to hit that game. But in terms of the Bears not being able to send that game into overtime and be more productive considering all the edges that they had in the game statistically from a rushing perspective and an offensive perspective. But the point remains that you cannot, in my opinion, rely on kickers. And if the Bears had a little bit more time than 1 minute and 32 seconds left in the game, like I would get the ball down as close as you can to the end zone in some chunk plays. And this sounds elementary, but a lot of coaches just they don't function this way. They would be dinking and dunking down the field with short little passes and then settle for a nice long, 48-yard field goal attempt. And in my opinion, you want to try to gain more chunk plays down the field, be a little bit more aggressive. The defense generally in these situations is playing to prevent like a big over-the-top play. But they're going to give up some other plays, and you just have to be able to hit them. For instance, if they're playing the perimeter of the field by the sidelines and not allowing you to beat them over the top, I would much rather run a couple of routes to the deep middle of the field where their coverage is probably less strong. And I'm not even saying like 30 yards down the field, but you could probably find a nice sweet spot in there with some route combinations if you run a guy down the left side of the field and then have another route that's run maybe 15, 17 yards to the deep middle of the field. You have a running back come across underneath to pull up that linebacker a little bit, and you just throw the ball right over the top of them, as opposed to these teams that run these plays where the wide receivers down the field are covered. So they're going to run 5 or 6 plays where they're like 5 to 6 yard gains on passes to the running back over the middle who gets immediately tackled. The issue becomes the amount of time that you have to run plays. You only have a certain amount of time. So if you're going to get tackled in bounds, it needs to be a play that's actually generating 15 yards or so, as opposed to repeated plays where you're being tackled for 5 to 6 to 7 yard gains over the short middle of the field. It's just not going to be enough to get you down the field. And at any rate, once you have some of these plays where you are getting tackled inbounds in the middle of the field, but you've gained a slight chunk, that's when I'm at the 25, 20-yard line. I'm taking a couple shots into the end zone. I am not going to rely, even if there's 20 seconds left, I'm not going to rely on just running the ball to gain an extra yard or two for my kicker. I'm trying to win the game right then and there and not send the game into overtime, not try to tie it up. But I am not going to allow my team, especially if I'm one of these teams headed to the postseason, I don't trust my kicker, I'm not going to allow my team to lose a game on a field goal attempt when I have a great offense that I believe in and I didn't do everything possible to be aggressive enough to win this game in regulation. Next up, let's go to a new page that I designed. Let's start looking ahead a little bit to the playoffs, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the games this week in the context of looking ahead to some of these teams. But a new page I just developed under the tools menu at the website, you go down to playoff factors matrix. And what I essentially did is I looked at 4 key factors, 4 key analytics that really correlate well to success, not just in the season, but also for the teams that tend to make the postseason and fare well. 2 offensive metrics and 2 defensive metrics. Now, throughout the course of the season, these aren't necessarily the most correlated metrics to success in terms of, just being a good team, quote unquote, or winning games on a weekly basis. Like, what do you have to do well to win this game? Well, these are the things that are going to correlate most to winning certain games and have the best success in games. Obviously, if we were doing that, we would be talking about early down success rate and things like that. But I wanted to create a matrix here that looks at 4 key elements. The 2 that I'm looking at offensively are rushing efficiency and explosive passing offense. Now, I'm assuming that if you have some semblance of explosive passing offense, your overall passing offense is probably not terrible. So that's why I don't think you need to recalculate another metric for overall passing offense. But there are going to be those exceptions where they're much more explosive. And by that I mean percentage of plays that are passes which gain at least 20 yards or more. It does not necessarily have to be a deep pass. It just needs to be a play that has gained 20 yards or more. How often is your team, when you're passing the ball, gaining 20-yard chunks in the passing game? That's what explosive passing is defined at Sharp Football Stats, and that's where that metric comes into play. I'm adding rushing efficiency because that's valuable for the postseason. If you can get a lead, and a lead generally comes by being able to pass the ball, when you get the lead by passing the ball, sometimes on explosive plays, and then you can run the ball for success, both to ice the game as well as to keep your opponent off the field and still score points offensively while the opposing defense gets weakened and your defense is resting. Those are big things. Plus, you get more inclement weather and things of that nature in the postseason and late in the season. So even though this is a passing league and passing is 4 times more correlated to wins than rushing the football, running the football in the postseason is vital, because if you can't run the football and you have a lead in the playoffs, you're always having that door open for the opponent, because inevitably you're not going to be as aggressive throwing the ball deep down the field. And unless you're a team like the Patriots, who can really control the clock with a very short passing game because you got a great quarterback and receivers who know what they're doing, and most teams don't have that, it's going to be difficult for you to control the game and ice it without being able to run the ball effectively. Now, I'm not suggesting the Patriots can't run the ball effectively. They actually are in the top 10 in rushing efficiency. But just theoretically, hypothetically, when you're talking about teams that can't run the football, what perils could that bring upon them? Defensively, it's 2 basic things. Your ability to pressure that opposing team through a strong pass rush. That's important because assuming you've got the lead, that other team's going to have to throw the ball more often. And if you can get in their face and disrupt that passing game, it's going to go a long way to your success. And then it's success in the red zone. How strong is your defense at turning red zone trips into field goals rather than touchdowns? Those 4 metrics are vital based on my analysis of teams that have success in the postseason. So what I did was I threw the page up at Sharp Football Stats for you to look at these teams, and I'll go ahead and discuss a few of them that are at the top of this list. And I'll be updating this every single Wednesday morning with the new analytics, as well as updated strength of schedule. And what I've done is I've added a strength of schedule factor. You can look at the past strength of schedule or the future strength of schedule. And the reason why I wanted to do that is so that you could see that strength of schedule in these 4 metrics. So the 2 offensive ones and the 2 defensive ones, how difficult was it for your team? The team that currently ranks at the top of this list is the Pittsburgh Steelers. From the AFC, and from the NFC, it's the New Orleans Saints. But very close behind the Saints are the Eagles, the Vikings, and the Carolina Panthers. Those 3 teams round out the kind of the top of the AFC, top of the NFC. And the Carolina Panthers might be the one that surprises you. They actually rank above the LA Rams. They rank above the Atlanta Falcons. And there's not really anybody else. You know, the Seattle Seahawks are way down here at the middle of the pack, primarily because they can't run the football. They surprisingly have not been as explosive. Now, I believe that their passing game is going to get more explosive. Now they're getting healthier on the offensive line. And they, by necessity, thanks to their defense, are getting there. But surprisingly, this team, in terms of pass rush, ranks just below average in terms of ability to pressure the opposing quarterback which is a little bit surprising from a Seattle Seahawks team. So they're not generating that pressure with their pass rush as much as they did last year. And so from these four collection of four statistics, they're basically middle of the pack. The teams that in the NFC that other teams that you might be surprised is where they sit, apart from the Carolina Panthers being ranked as high as they are the Detroit Lions and the Buffalo Bills. Detroit has played the second most difficult schedule of opponents in this. The Buffalo Bills are AFC, surprise. But the Detroit Lions have played the second most difficult schedule, but yet they still rank way, way, way down here. The other team that's a little bit surprising, and by way down here for you listening at home, we're talking about like the seventh worst team, I believe. Yeah, the seventh worst team by the metrics. If you talk about the Dallas Cowboys, that's another surprising team because we still haven't seen a full 6 games yet of Ezekiel Elliott's absence in these metrics. So even with just 2 games of Ezekiel Elliott not being there, they are not very explosive passing the football. See, their rushing efficiency is going to drop off. It was second best as of this time on the full season. This is going to drop off. Their explosive passing offense is way down at 26th. Their red zone defense is horrible. And so those are the 2 main weaknesses for this team right now as to why they're not higher. Let's look at the AFC. In the AFC, we have the Steelers at the top, and then the teams that we have next are the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New England Patriots. Now, the New England Patriots, their real struggle because they're top 10 in everything except for pass rush. Their pass rush is really bad, which means that theoretically opposition should be able to throw the ball to produce points on them late in games. In other words, never being able to fully outdistance themselves. But there's a couple things going in their factor that make them a more of an abnormal team with such a bad pass rush. Number one, they're so good offensively that they really can ice games. We saw it in Oakland. Like, they're so good that they can just continue to drive the ball, convert first downs, and score more points. So that's one thing. The second thing is they rank 8th best in red zone defense. So they have been successful at holding opposing teams to field goals rather than touchdowns down inside the red zone. And that will always allow a team like the Patriots or any other team to, if you've got the lead, make it difficult for your opponent to come back because you're so good at clamping down on things in the red zone. Now, personally, I want to see better defense across the full length of the field rather than just in the red zone. But when we're talking about the postseason, you're going to be going up against a number of good offenses who are going to be able to move the ball on you. If you're able to clamp down on these guys in the red zone, it goes a long way. Now, talking about a couple of teams that really are not playoff contenders. Well, let's talk about one team in particular, but has really good metrics, is the Chicago Bears, who rank, it looks like, as the 8th best team on these metrics in terms of 8th best overall. But they've played the second most difficult schedule, and yet they still rank 8th best. And they don't have a shot, Mitchell Trubisky. They're not going to go to the postseason this year. It's a losing team that continues to lose close games. I mean, they're 3-7. But if they can build on this and their success next year and get healthier at the receiver position, obviously they've had a lot of overhaul at the receiver position, some by choice, some by, with Alshon Jeffrey, others by injury. This is a team that you might want to be aware of for the future because they do a lot of things well. They do a lot of things well in Chicago. But this is going to be a very useful page for you to go back to and look at as in terms of where teams rank based on these interesting metrics. You can see that the Kansas City Chiefs, another team that we should call out, below average on these metrics, even though they're currently slotted to be a playoff team this year. So interesting things from the playoff factors matrix on sharpfootballstats.com. Switching over to another topic which relates to postseason success, and that's trending performance. And I talked about this at the top of the show about teams that are or the peril of using full season data and not focusing enough on what's recently been happening. You want to be careful and include schedule into that context, but trending performance is vital. And there's a page that I created to help showcase that a little bit at Sharp Football Stats under the Offense and Efficiency Success tab called Trending Performance. And what you can see with this trending performance is I've looked at the four key types of statistics: passing success and rushing success, and then explosive passing and explosive rushing. Because success rate obviously defines, and for those of you that don't know, success rate basically looks at 40% of yards gained that are required in terms of getting a first down on first down. So 40% of the yards to go. On second down, it's 60% of the yards to go. And on third or fourth down, it's 100% of the yards to go. And either the play was successful in that it got those required yards or it was not. That's how success rate is defined. Explosive passing, explosive rushing, passing gains of 20 plus yards on a pass attempt, regardless of how far that pass travels. Rushing attempts, explosive rushing, any run play that gains 10 or more yards is an explosive run. And those are just rates. Number of rushing plays that were explosive out of the total number of rushing attempts gives you your rate of explosive rushing. And what you can see is on this visualization, you can select the weeks that you want to focus on for your trending period, and you can compare what they've done recently to what they were doing earlier in the season. And so here's a great example. Let's look at the Detroit Lions. This is a team that really has been coming on out of using both explosive passing and rushing, as well as just general passing success. On the season, their pass success rate is 45%, which is 15th in the league. But it's 53% the last 3 weeks. Really strong, and that's the 5th best in the league the last 3 weeks. Their rushing has been about steady, not very good, but about consistent in terms of where they rank in the NFL. Although, and you can see 36% on the year and 34% the last few weeks. But explosive passing, 7th best on the year at 10%, but the last 3 weeks, 14% of their pass attempts have been successful. That's the 2nd best rate in the NFL, behind only the Saints, who are number 1 for the season and for the last 3 weeks. But rushing attempts, while Detroit has not been very successful in running the football, they've been much more explosive the last few weeks. Ranked 20th on the year at 11% of their runs gaining 10 or more yards. The last 3 weeks, 12% of the runs gained 10 or more yards. That's 7th best in the league. So the percentage hasn't changed a lot. What we're seeing is that the rest of the league hasn't been quite as successful running the ball for explosive gains, whereas Detroit has been a little bit better than what they have been on the year. This is just a useful thing to look at, but I will tell you, you want to go back and compare this to the strength of schedule. So when we look at the Detroit Lions and we look at the defenses that they faced, lo and behold, the last 3 weeks, who have they played? They've played the Chicago Bears, who struggle at quarterback. They play the Cleveland Browns, also a team, no quarterback, Deshaun Kaiser. And then they played the Green Bay Packers, another team with no quarterback, Brett Hundley. And none of those defenses are great. I mean, they rank about average or slightly above average in terms of total defensive efficiency. But you can definitely see something when you're looking at the strength of schedule for the Lions, in that they had played some really good defenses the prior few weeks, top 10 defenses, and they lost 3 of those 4 games, talking about losses to the Steelers, the Saints, the Panthers, and they beat the Vikings. Then they play some middling defenses, and they win all 3 of those games. Barely covering against the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland should have covered in that game. Chicago possibly should have won this game outright. There were 3.5s out there if you got that. So they narrowly, if you were laying the Lions, though, you would have covered the spread in these 3 games. You would have pushed the game against the Bears. If you were taking the Bears, you would have covered that game because you could have gotten the 3.5, but you would have lost these other 2 games against if you took the Packers or the Cleveland Browns. But now they're about to face 2 very difficult teams from a defensive perspective. The Vikings, who they played earlier this year, and then the Ravens. So it'll be interesting to see how these factors that have helped them so much the last few weeks in their successful passing that has increased by 8%, in their explosive passing, which has been phenomenal and strong overall, but much better the last few weeks, as well as their explosive rushing. Are they going to get those things against the Vikings and the Ravens defense? If they can't, how will that impact their ability to perform like they've been performing, understanding that they've been narrowly covering their last couple games and pushing their last one. So like this team is at an interesting point in time against these much more difficult defenses that they're going to be going up against. The other page to look at that I just created is called Weekly Performance and Trend Lines. And I think you're going to find this one pretty interesting. This weekly performance and trend lines visualization you can find up at the Tools menu because it factors in both offense and defense, and under the Tools menu, Weekly Performance and Trend Lines. Essentially what this visualization allows us to do is allows us to look on a week-by-week basis, those 4 metrics I just mentioned from the other graphic: passing success, rushing success, explosive passing, and explosive rushing. How are teams doing on a weekly basis in those percentages, and how are they trending over the course of the season? So what I've done is I built this, overlaid the defenses so that you can see the defenses that they faced for the offense. And then you can come over here and you can look at their defensive performance as well. And what I've enabled you to do is select an offense and a defense. So if you desire to just go with the same team in both to just get a good overall picture as to what this team is doing, you can put both of them up there, select them both. But if you want to look at a particular matchup and you want to say, well, what is the matchup between, let's say, Tampa Bay and Atlanta? How is Tampa Bay's offense trending and what is Atlanta's defense trending like? You can look at those simultaneously, and it provides a lot of useful context from that perspective as well. But looking at a team like the Dallas Cowboys, it's clearly evident to see that their rushing has dropped off tremendously the last couple of games without Ezekiel Elliott. And look at what the impact that is having on Dak Prescott and the passing game. Now, from an explosive rushing perspective, they had some success against the Atlanta Falcons with gaining some chunk yards, and they weren't terrible either against the Philadelphia Eagles. So they're being able to get some explosive gains out of the run game, but it's just not consistent. And what you need for success in the NFL is consistency mixed with just a little bit of explosiveness. And what we're seeing is just not very much consistency whatsoever. And some of these explosive runs, mind you, are coming when they're down big and they're just busting out runs as the defense is playing a little bit more pass. So that's one thing to keep in mind from that perspective. With regard to their defense, you can see without Sean Lee, their defensive metrics are trending worse. You look at the successful pass rate that they've allowed, that is getting much worse. And you can see the games where Sean Lee has missed time versus when he's been there. They are much better when Sean Lee is in the lineup than when he is out of the lineup. And especially from a run game perspective, you could see these are games with Sean Lee in the early part of the season, and then the sort of the most recent part of the season, and then games without Sean Lee, what they've allowed to decent rushing offenses. So the Dallas Cowboys obviously are in for some trouble here against the LA Chargers. One of the reasons why is because the LA Chargers are not a very consistent rushing attack, but if you're going to allow them to be more consistent running the football, this passing offense is going to open up a ton. And we saw that this past weekend as well against the Bills, because this is a team that's really used to getting nothing on first down. They hand the ball so often to Melvin Gordon. He gets nothing on first down. They're constantly on second and long. That's where this team lives, the Chargers. And if the Chargers can have better success on first down, it's going to be absolutely massive. And you can actually filter this. You can filter this one by down or quarter or a lot of different other things so that you can look at exactly how teams have been performing on these downs. And for instance, if you look at the first down success rate that Dallas Cowboys are allowing from a rushing perspective, you could see without Sean Lee in there, 65% success rate, 56% success rate, and last week 64% success rate. With Sean Lee in there, the first down rushing rate for their opponents is down at 20%, 50%, 33%, 44% and 25%. So much, much better than what they've been allowing without Sean Lee in there. So if the LA Chargers are able to run the ball successfully on first down, it's going to be a massive benefit for their overall offensive efficiency in this game. And I think it's going to go a long ways to helping the Chargers have a lot of success in this game on Thanksgiving. So this is another page that you could do a lot with. You can, like I said, match up offense or defense and match up teams against one another here. I think this is going to be very useful later in the season, now and down the road, to look at how teams are trending. And I've tried to build these couple of tools between this weekly performance and trend lines, as well as the offensive trending performance, to give you guys control on what you want to look at, but also show you things that you're not going to find at any other website out there, so that you can actually see how this trending performance is impacting offenses and defenses alike, and how that could factor into their season-long, your understanding of their season-long performance while looking at it in the context of recent performance. And that's why I've made sure to include their opponents in these games, so that you're able to kind of mentally understand the context from that perspective. With that said, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap up this Wednesday before Thanksgiving edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. I hope that you guys have a great Thanksgiving. I'm not overly thrilled with the slate that we have, especially the nightcap, but I do think that we're going to have some interesting storylines and interesting matchups on the games for Thanksgiving. And of course, there's a couple of key games for postseason that's going to really play a role in postseason, where teams are going to head. And obviously the Rams versus the New Orleans Saints is a massive one for the postseason, and that's the late slate. I wish they flexed that to the prime time. I really don't want to see Brett Hundley in prime time against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but at least they pushed it back to the 4:25 time slot, because Jacksonville, Arizona, as well as Denver, Oakland, not really compelling matchups. So the Saints-Rams game being slotted at that time instead of the 1 p.m. Eastern kick is tremendously improved, but I wish they did a little bit more to make it a better time slot for us at a primetime game. But with all that said, guys, a lot of good information. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast. Good luck this week with everything that you're doing. Stay safe. Safe travels for everybody. Oh, by the way, thank you guys all for your thoughts and prayers with my daughter's procedures that occurred last week. Yeah, I just really appreciate that. People reaching out and saying that they were thinking of her. So definitely appreciate that. Guys, be thankful for what you've got. I know we always try to want more, try to be greedy, try to get a little bit aggressive. And I mean, I'm fully guilty of that as well. Always trying to work harder, work longer hours, trying to do more and more better things. I don't necessarily look at that as a problem, but it does turn into being a workaholic and that sort of thing, and you lose focus of sometimes the things that you've got and the things that you should be thankful for. So hopefully we all can take a minute to step back tomorrow on Thanksgiving, reflect back on the things that we are truly thankful for, things that are in our life that we are happy about, and be able to enjoy those things and those people on Thanksgiving. With that said, guys, we will talk to you next Monday for the Sharp Football Show on Monday night. And until then, hope you guys have a great and safe Thanksgiving with you and your family.